Great. Welcome, everybody. As everyone starts to sort of gather in, we'll just take a couple of minutes while everyone sort of clicks on the little login button. So welcome. Happy Saturday morning. Thanks for joining us. Hope you have your coffee and getting settled into your chair, couch, wherever you are watching us. It's going to be a really incredible conversation, and I hope that you also participate. Please utilize the chat feature to submit questions. We will have a very robust conversation with our panelists, but there will certainly be some opportunity to ask a question as well. So I encourage you to submit that as you're going, and we'll it's just at 10:01, so we'll kind of wait another minute or so before, because I know everyone kind of doesn't always rush in, and especially being on a Saturday morning. So we really thank you for taking your time out of your weekend to join us for this very important topic and conversation, as well as joining us for Triton Leaders Conference. I hope you all had a chance to catch some of the sessions yesterday. I was just commenting to my colleagues that I thought yesterday's session that I joined was really informative. And I have no doubt that you will find that as well with this morning's session. So we're just going to kind of bear with us, give us maybe one more minute. I see our numbers are kind of popping in, and then we'll get going. Oh, and then for those of you who weren't sure where the heck you are, this is Allyship in STEM. So I hope you know that you logged into the right session. And if not, stick around because it's going to be a really good conversation. So I'm thinking it's 10:02. Without further ado, I am going to turn it over to our illustrious Dr. Tavina Lin, who has agreed to moderate and join us for today's session. So Tavina, please take it away.
Thank you, Kim. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here for what we have planned a great discussion. Welcome to Allyship in STEM. I think many of us can use an ally. If you can, just raise your hand or do a thumbs up reaction if you agree that you can use an ally. All right, so in STEM studies have shown many women and underrepresented minorities who want to be astronomers or chemists or pursue careers in STEM don't get to be what they want to be when they grow up because of systemic barriers they may face. Today, we're going to hear from our wonderful panelists and their personal journey of how they broke these barriers and what they're doing today to help the next generation of STEM professionals, leaving you with insights and examples of ways you can begin to practice allyship, not only in STEM, but within your day-to-day life. So at this time, I would like to introduce our panelists. Oh my God, am I in?
I think you're good.
We can see and hear you.
You all can still hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry about that. I think my internet connection is a little unstable.
That's the beauty of today's technology.
Yes.
Just we roll with where we're at.
All right, so we have Professor Allison Coyle, who's a professor of physics and associate dean of equity, diversity, inclusion, and a faculty equity advisor here in the Division of Physical Sciences. We also have Franklin Garrett, who is the director of the Student Success Center within the Division of Physical Sciences. And we have Sabrina Johal. Sabrina, please let me know if I'm saying your name correctly.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Who is the Director of Strategic Development at General Atomics. And thank you for your service within the Navy. And I get to serve as our moderator. I am the CEO and founder of STEMing and also an alum of UCSD within the chemistry department. I received my PhD in 2020. So thank you, panelists, for being here. We will jump into our first question. And the first question is, can we start by defining the difference between an ally and co-conspirator? And this is particularly directed to Franklin and Allison. So Franklin, can you start us off?
I'll go ahead and start. So while the theme for the Triton Leadership Conference is about allyship, and our talk today is about allyship in STEM, we think it's important to define allyship and draw distinctions between what it means to be an ally and what it means to go beyond being an ally, and as it relates to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So let's begin with describing an ally. An ally gives support and acknowledges issues related to social justice and equity. Being an ally is about recognizing your own privilege, then using it to be in solidarity with marginalized groups. An ally is considered one of the first steps in race and social justice work. In her book titled, We Do More Than Just Survive, Abolitionist Teaching in the Pursuit of Educational Freedom, Dr. Batetta Love, encourages people to go beyond merely just being an ally and become co-conspirators, committed to ridding the education system of white supremacy, anti-Blackness, and sexism. She describes a co-conspirator as someone who goes beyond just acknowledging issues related to social justice and equity. Co-conspirators are actively involved in dismantling the systems that allow inequity to exist. A co-conspirator is an individual who centers humanity and is willing to take personal risks and sacrifice for the sake of others' humanity. So one question for us to think about as we go through this presentation is how do we move across the spectrum from being an ally to a co-conspirator? We realize that being an ally is where we start, but as we get more comfortable, more brave, how do we move beyond that?
Yeah, so Franklin's the one who introduced me to this term, co-conspirator, and then he pointed me to Dr. Bettina Love. So if you haven't heard of her, she has some really wonderful material. She has a TED Talk if you want to start with that before reading her whole book. But the thing that I take away from that is that ally is an initial step and co-conspirator is a further step. And the key for me is that you're willing to give something up. You have skin in the game. You're not just like advocating for someone else where like if it works or it doesn't impact you. Like you're willing to use your power and your privilege not just to like raise issues, but to give something that you have away. Like the outcome impacts you, not just the people you're advocating for or with. So that to me is what the co-conspirator part is that you're willing to put something on the line and give something up. So it's definitely more of a commitment than being an ally. Yeah, the term ally, I don't know, it's complicated. It's an okay term, I guess, but it makes me a little nervous because here's the reason why. People can claim that they're allies. It's not a term that you claim for yourself. It's a verb, first of all, and it's something that other people would indicate that you have been an advocate or an ally. You don't go around saying, "Oh, I'm an advocate." It shouldn't be a self-label. Yeah, those are my thoughts for now.
Thank you for those thoughts. I love how it starts off really with self-awareness, like of your privilege. And then I feel like once you have that self-awareness, then you get to sort of be a co-conspirator, right? And do from that awareness. Did you want to add anything to this definition, Sabrina?
No, I have nothing to add. I think it's very intriguing and true.
Thank you. All right, so we'll keep moving right along. This question is to Franklin. The Division of Physical Sciences created the Student Success Center to help our students beyond the classroom. What are some of the programs created and implemented to help address some of the inequities in STEM? And what more are you and the center looking to accomplish both in the near and distant future?
So the Student Success Center, in the Student Success Center, we create academic enrichment and professional development programs and initiatives to support all physical science students. But we do recognize that sometimes there's an opportunity gap that exists among students themselves. So for this reason, we create programs that target and provide additional support to students. And one program that comes to mind is our physical sciences cohort program. So in that program, we have incoming freshmen coming in. We develop a support system addressing some of the struggles that new students face, especially those who come from backgrounds underrepresented in STEM. In addition to that program, we have a Expand program, which is a peer-to-peer mentorship program, which prepares students to do undergraduate research. Because there's a notion in higher education about how sometimes it further privileges the privileged. So if you're a second generation student, you know how the system works, you know how to play the game, you know the hidden curriculum. It really does put you ahead of other students. So what we try to do in the center is even that out a little bit by adding additional support to our students.
Can I jump in and add one more thing? Is that okay? So the Student Success Center is mostly focused on the student experience, but and most of the things are targeted for students. The one thing we're trying to expand out to in terms of increasing the awareness of faculty around these issues. And a thing that I've been really working on is trying to have more faculty be interested in creating inclusive classrooms when they teach. And what does that mean? And what does that mean specifically for somebody who's teaching math, for chemistry, physics? So this is new, we just started this year, but just as another example, I created this monthly, it's called Mighty Lunch Series for faculty to just come and create community and start sharing examples of, it can be small things that they're doing in the classroom to make their classes more inclusive and equitable. And it's been really fun. We've had people from across the division who've never met, mostly faculty, but some grad students and postdocs as well, just talking about really small specific things that they're doing in class. So one of the things we are also trying to do through the center is create more allies. And it's starting with increasing awareness amongst the faculty of like, what does this look like very specifically in the things they're already doing in the classroom and in their research groups. I feel like we may have lost our moderator.
I think I'm back.
Okay.
All right. So I think, Allison, you talked a little bit about how you all want to get more faculty involved. And so can you talk a little bit about how you are approaching getting faculty buy-in, since the students are, you know, interfacing with faculty on a day-to-day basis?
I can jump in there and then had Allison jump in. So it's important to note that the center itself was an initiative from our dean, which obviously is a faculty member. And we have Allison, who, and also Tomas Herman, our Associate Dean for Education and Students. So it's a really initiative that is faculty driven and then developed the center and staffed the center. And then on top of that, the way we work with faculty members is we have a faculty council where we get them all together and they give input on what the center can do to improve experiences of students. So we work really closely with faculty members. A specific example of how faculty members are working with our students is our undergraduate research award. So every summer, students are eligible up to $7,500 to do undergraduate research. In order for them to do undergraduate research, they need to get faculty mentorship. They have to get a faculty member to commit to spend that time with them over the summer to do a research project. So that's just an example of how we work with faculty, but it really is students, faculty. It really is a shared village type of approach to make sure that everybody has the input of some of the services that we provide in the center.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit more about what we're doing at the faculty level too. So not necessarily through the Student Success Center, but just in general. So I think it's really, really important to have leadership be very aware of these issues and send very clear, consistent, strong messages and put resources behind trying to make these kinds of changes. So I have multiple roles, but one is as a faculty equity advisor, and then also our dean created a new position for me, which is the associate dean for equity, diversity, and inclusion, which didn't exist before. So that means I get to spend a lot of my time thinking about faculty issues. And there's different ways that to do this. One is to sort of have individual conversations with people. Another is to think about policies and look really deeply at like, how are we hiring faculty in that process, and where can we infuse looking at equity, diversity, inclusion throughout the process, and how can we track the demographics during the hiring process, and look for change over time. I've done really deep dives into salary equity. Do we have salary equity? Do we have promotion equity? Do we have leadership equity? Are women faculty and faculty of color given as many opportunities to, this might sound really small, but it's not, like be on important committees and chair important committees and lead hiring searches. And so there's all kinds of things. I spent a lot of my time looking at like, where do we have equity, where do we not? And then figuring out how can we tweak our policies, and then talking with the faculty and the leaders in the departments, the department chairs, around what we're doing and why, and getting their buy-in. And so there's lots of levels to do this. And I think to really make change, you can work with people individually, and you can create community, and all that stuff is important. And you also have to have leadership on board, and you have to be addressing policies and collecting data, and just taking a really honest look at where the institution is at. And then also developing strategic plans around, like, once you have to have the data to know where you're at, then thinking about where do we want to get to, like have that vision, and then have very concrete steps for how are we going to get there, and how will we know that we have gotten there? Not just these vague, like, oh, we want to have more diversity in leadership. Like, okay, how much, who, when? Write it down, have conversations with everybody involved to make sure that everyone's on board. Anyway, I could go on forever, but those are the kinds of, that's a lot of the kind of work that I'm doing in my role.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Allison and Franklin. All right, so this question is directed to Franklin and Sabrina. Would you share some of the day-to-day challenges you encounter within your workplace?
You want me to jump in, Franklin?
Yes, you can go first.
Okay. So I work at a company called General Atomics, and we do a lot of work in plasma physics. And within the plasma physics department and pipeline, there is not a lot of diversity in terms of gender. And in fact, it's in the single-digit percentages of our female to male breakout. And so what I found challenging is there are a lot of unconscious biasing around gender that most people aren't even aware that's there. And so how do we bring that more in the open and start addressing it? And, whether good intentions or bad intentions or covert or overt actions, I think acknowledging and educating around these biases is going to be the best way of actually making change. Because what we're seeing is when you look at the younger years, females, males, boys, and girls, they basically score the same in terms of these technologies. It isn't in other words, it's not the capacity for mental evaluation of physics or whatever. But then as they go through the pipelines, they go from grade school into college, into the workforce, and then even within the workforce from, just being an entry level to a manager, there's attrition every single step along the way. And so what can we do in terms of improving that condition? And it's something that I'm very passionate about. I think it has to be addressed and it has to be changed, because when you start looking at some of these STEM fields, that's where a lot of the innovation and excitement is. And so, you want equal representation, because in order to really innovate, you have to have different voices at the table, different backgrounds. When you start looking at perception and the way that we frame things, it's so based on where we came from and what our historical and lived experiences are. And so the more you can have diversity within that perspective, the more innovative you're going to be. And I think truly the better off we'll be in the human condition, because we'll have all of these great advances. And I know for me personally, I would really love to see a lot more women at the table with me. I can't tell you how many times I'm the only woman in the room.
Let's say one of the main challenges just with large that I see is just this notion that diversity has become a charitable enterprise. So over the last couple of years, if you go to the movies now, you see different, even like a Marvel movie, like a superhero movie, you'll see Black people, Asian people, because they're recognizing that you can make money by being diverse. Like, go figure, like, representing the population, you can actually make money off of that. So to know who's really true and really care about the issue and not, it becomes hard. When something happens, even at UCSD, when we had things happen, we have statements go out of support, right? We're supporting anti-Blackness, some of the Asian hate crime. We're supporting, speaking up against that. But then the question is, what does that mean? Like, what strategy are you going to use to improve the climate on our campus? How much money are you going to put into recruiting students from diverse backgrounds? It's never, a lot of times it's not really met with the action. So I think one of the strategies to combat that is really to go from equity talk to equity action. And even when we started out on this panel, we're talking about allyship, which is a great first step, but let's be bolder. Let's go beyond just allies. Like, we need co-conspirators. We need people who are going to use their authority and their privilege to help others. And obviously there's a varying level of comfort, right? We don't expect everybody to jump off the ledge and do that, but as you get more comfortable, just push a little bit more, because we've all, no matter what background we come, we've all been in a situation where diversity was important. And we felt how that was not to be represented. So I think that's one strategy, and we just got to keep pushing back in these times, because it shouldn't take a George Floyd or some of the things we've seen over a couple of years to get people to talk about this. Because my fear is that after that dies down, we'll just go back to doing what we've been doing historically. So.
Thank you. That's such a great point, Franklin. That makes me think about like the push to increase diversity with students, right? We want more diverse students. Like, when I was applying for graduate school, I remember having specific faculty pull me to the side to talk about their interest in, like, we want more students of color to come into this program. But then the question is, okay, once I'm here, what tools, what do I have to retain me, right? What support do I have? What have you all done to sort of prepare for the students once they arrive? So I love how you talk about that next step of action, right? The discussion or just saying we want to do it isn't enough, right? We have to take that next step. I wanted to go back to you, Sabrina, where you talked about commonly being the only woman in spaces. Like, what tools and strategies do you use to move through those spaces and really to still keep your sanity, right? And to also have like your mental health still be in check as well?
That's a tough question. So I think when you first find yourself being the only one, because it was not like that for me. I came from Montana. It was always very equitable in terms of gender. And then my first experience and exposure was in the US military as a naval officer. And I was the first woman on the ship that I was stationed out of in Pearl Harbor. And we ended up deploying during Operation Iraqi Freedom to the Persian Gulf. And we didn't have women restroom facilities. And so we had, a crew of 240, 250 people with 2 women without restroom facilities. And so right now, where we're talking about allyship and co-conspirators, the idea of having a co-conspirator on the ship with me would have been wonderful, because what I found was I had even limited allies. And it was a very polarized community. And we deployed that ship ended up deploying for 10 months. I was eventually moved on to the nuclear pipeline after 6. But those 6 months were so isolating and alienating that if one of the other people who were on board could have even taken that step to, how do I help improve that condition? And so from being in a place like that, I think it's taught me a lot and made me very sensitive, moving forward now into the career professional workplace, which is much nicer, much more, it's not as raw, everybody goes home at the end of the day. But for those of us who find ourselves in the majority, taking note of that, and then looking at the more diverse aspects and diving in and helping, understanding that maybe it's not your job or you're not required to do it. But this idea of, being a kind human and helping others, a lot of people just I don't think they realize it unless they've been in the position. So how do we get people to buy in and realize, oh, this is me? I'm one of 30 and there's one over here. Let me go over there and make sure that person feels welcome and that they're getting what they need in this environment.
Wow. It always comes back to like the basic things like kindness.
Yeah.
Really goes a long way with addressing these inequities in STEM.
Davina, do you mind if I
So
jump in? I want to amplify a few things that you all have said that I think were really interesting. So Davina, you had a really, really good point. I feel like this is out of order, but anyway, the order that we did it in, you said when you're looking at graduate school, places were like, we really want students of color. And they were really focused on like getting people in the door. And I think it depends on the kind of institution you're at and where they're at in terms of their awareness. So like maybe in the military, the thing is getting people in the door. Like there are definitely places where that is still the biggest barrier. But for a lot of places that have moved past that, or like once they're looking at that, you can't stop there. Then you have to look at not just diversity, but inclusion. Like, how are those people going to be supported when they're there? How are you said retaining them, not only retaining them, but like supporting them? How are you making sure that they're moving through at the same rate as everyone else? And like you said, not having disproportionate mental health impacts around their experiences there. So I just wanted to really amplify that. And then I also want to amplify something that Sabrina said that I think it's so true about when you're the only in the room. It makes you really, or it can, but I think often makes you really sensitive to these issues. And it's like you see things. This is my experience anyway, because I was the only, when I became a faculty member, and then I worked really hard. I was the only woman. And then I worked really hard to bring in more women. And then I moved up in my career to a leadership role. And then once again, I was the only. So it's not like it's just a thing at one career stage. As you move up, it can actually get worse. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah, it makes you very sensitive. I think you start to see things quite clearly that you look around and you're like, am I the only person seeing this right now? And if you're the only whatever in the room, you might actually be the only person. It might not be that clear to others. So I think, one of the things that we all can do when we are an only is point out what we're seeing. It doesn't mean that they're going to just go, oh, that's so interesting. Thanks so much for that input. I hadn't thought of it that way. That's not generally been my experience. They're usually like, I don't know, that doesn't sound right. I've helped facilitate these conversations where somebody in leadership like specifically talks to people from underrepresented groups to hear about their experiences. And the whole idea was that you want to hear from them, you need to hear from them, and then it's supposed to lead to action. But what happened was the person in leadership who's not from an underrepresented group, what they were hearing didn't make sense to them. It wasn't their experience and it didn't fit their worldview and also their experience of that institution. And so they couldn't like take it in. It's not that they were actively disbelieving them. It just didn't align with their thinking. And so it didn't do anything. So I think it's a really hard question around like, when you're the only, how can you advocate and also stay sane? I think just starting with noticing that sensitivity, recognizing that is a gift, getting really clear with yourself on like what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, what you think is going on, and then working to verbalize that in a way that doesn't come across as, you have to be real skillful about how you do it to try to get people to hear you stuff. But then also understanding it might not be that simple that you just say it once and people get it. You might have to say this for a really long time, and you might have to find other people to amplify it, and you might need to create some community, and you might need to work with leadership to create some accountability. So, but I think that the key thing is like being really clear on what you're seeing and then speaking up about it. Yeah. Sorry, those were really important points. I wanted to make sure we didn't gloss over those.
Yes, thank you for bringing those in. So I have a couple thoughts that come to mind about that. One is it puts a lot of the onus onto the only one in the room, right? And you do feel like you have to say something, right, to be that change, but also where is the accountability for everyone else? Right. So the other question I want to sort of go into, right? All of us here, we're invested in allyship in STEM. So in some ways, it almost may feel like we're preaching to the choir, right? We're not trying to convince anybody here. But how do we make significant systemic change when the majority of our faculty colleagues, for example, or in the workplace, right, may not see the value in addressing these inequities and welcoming diverse voices in the STEM space? So really, how do we hold them accountable? And this is for anyone, so anyone can jump in.
Yeah. I'm happy to start, and then I want to hear from everyone else. I think this is where leadership is absolutely crucial. I think it's almost impossible to make change. Not impossible, it's really hard without leadership buy-in. And it doesn't mean that they have to, from the get-go, fully get it, but they have to be willing to have these conversations, listen, try things. They have to be willing to be held accountable. So that part is really, really important. It's really hard to make change without leadership being on board. So, like we were saying before, and Franklin was saying, like, we really need to get to like, what are the actions here? Getting really clear and specific around what changes you want to see, and then figuring out how to make those, and then putting numbers on things and timescales. Like, I know that sounds boring and pedantic, but it's really important. You have to be able to measure the change and see it. Yeah, so I think leadership is crucial here. And part of that is like reframing what jobs are. Like, it's no longer okay to even have a job description if it's a leadership role that doesn't consider this. And it shouldn't be like, oh, and like, here's all the things. Oh, and we tacked this on at the end. If you could get to this, that would be great. It needs to be like central. If you're a leader, this is part of your job, and it's a key core part of your job. And you have to work with others, and you're going to be held accountable, and there's going to be transparency around it. Okay. I want to hear from the other.
Yeah, I want to just add one quick point. I want to highlight too that like everyone is a leader, right? So you don't necessarily have to be in leadership, but if you're a faculty, like, you are a leader. You're a role model for your students. And so it really should be in everybody's job description. And I wonder what it would look like to hold everyone accountable, right, across all the various constituents within the university.
I was going to piggyback on some of what Allison was talking about the data and metrics. And using an example, like if you look at staff demographics, the higher you go up on the university, right? So on certain levels is very diverse. You get higher, it's less diverse. So I mean, we can look at metrics. Who's getting interviewed as for certain positions? Who's getting exceptions to policy? Like, there's things that we could ask leadership to just go look. Like, data is already collected for them to take a closer look at, or maybe have an outside person take a closer look at it. And then the second piece of this is transparency. Going back to the university's vision and mission, or any company's vision and mission, it always sounds nice and flowery. But what if you put your metrics right next to that, right next to your mission statement? If you're saying we are about equity, diversity, and inclusion, but what does that mean? Like, literally, that means, like, using an example, in San Diego, it's about 6% African Americans. I don't feel like we can say we're a diverse campus if we don't at least represent the city or county we're in. So the goal could be, make sure you have 6% of this population, because then it's representative of the county that resides there. So I just think things like that, and it really boils down to the accountability. And in a lot of cases, companies are doing really great things, but they don't even cheerlead the great things they're doing. It just needs to be more accountability across the board.
I agree with everything that's said. I feel like right now, in the space we're in, that it's a good time to be making these changes. I would say 5-7 years ago, I did not feel comfortable having these conversations that we're having at the workplace. And so wanting to take as much advantage of the space we're in now. Yeah, so we're technologists, we like data. We started with data. We looked at what the numbers were within our company. They weren't good. That drove, okay, we need to do something different. So looking at, from an industry perspective, who's doing it well and what are they doing that does it well? And then bringing on a consultant, because this is tough territory to navigate. And there are a lot of pitfalls along the way, and it's very sensitive. And so who's done it, and from a consultant perspective that we can bring in to help us navigate this and look at these issues. And then I think the social science behind, specifically when I'm looking at gender issues or perception and, all of these unbiased, unconscious biasing, having the social science behind it and the stories behind it and the research that's been done is really important if you're going to change people's perspective, because otherwise I don't think they'll have that aha moment that they need to have in order to make the change.
Yeah, I want to amplify that I didn't know about the social science research when I was first experiencing a lot of this as a junior faculty member. And then I started reading about it and I was like, oh, all of these things that seemed so specific to the room and the people and the place I was at, it turns out they're not specific at all. They happen everywhere in really common ways. I think it's really, really important for people to understand that.
Maybe two things that were for me were, oh wow, that's not just me, there's this thing called he spoke, where say I'm in a room and I'm the only woman in the room and I make a comment and it just sort of, people keep going, and then my male colleague makes the same exact comment and all of a sudden, oh, that is so incredible, that is so, and I'm going, I just said that. And, and I guess that's common. I don't know why, but, and then the second one, and this gets a little sensitive, I think, but, you would think that if there were so few females in this area, that we would be bolstering each other and supporting each other and wanting us to be successful. And what I've found is that sometimes that's not the case. You may find, someone giving you a lot of hardship, your female colleague, and you're wondering why. And so there's this thing where it's the woman spot, and people think it can be the whatever spot, but the one spot that's held for whatever this is that there isn't a majority with, and it's a minority position. And so then you have all of this sort of weird infighting, and I think just if we could even recognize that network, that support system is really important, I think would be good.
Yeah, and there's social science work around that too, around basically people feeling like they have to fight for the 1 or 2 slots and why that comes about. Joan Williams has worked on this a lot. She's at UC Hastings. Anyway, she has a book called What Works for Women at Work. That's one of the things she talks about.
Thank you all. So I love that we bring up the social science data, because one of the questions I remember hearing is like, we need to see the data, especially being in a university setting. We need to see the data, and the data is there, right, for the inequities in STEM. And so one, it's looking at the data that's already there, right? Because I think we can choose to act like we don't see the data. And I love, Sabrina, how you brought up the importance of the stories that goes along with the data, because that really speaks to like the human experience of that individual's experience. So I want to bring up another question that's based on my personal experience in grad school. So I can recall a meeting I had with my faculty advisor. This was during my last year of my PhD program. And I shared with her that I didn't want to become a faculty member because I was concerned how much of my mental health I would have to sacrifice. I didn't even consider that I enjoyed all the functions of being a faculty, right? Like teaching and research. So my question to you all is, how do you, I know that I'm not the only person, right, that comes into STEM and could be the change, right, could go into a faculty position, but really makes the decision not to because of what that may mean in terms of sacrificing my mental health. How do you balance being the change you want to see with not being a martyr? And anyone can jump in.
I'll jump in briefly because I actually have this conversation with students pretty often who contact me who are having issues. And after I build a relationship with them and I have a rapport, in so many words, I let them know that the grass isn't greener on the other side, basically. So that whether you go into academia, if you go into industry, you're going to experience these type of things. Anytime you're underrepresented in a space, you may experience some of these things and really focus on building up their emotional and psychological strength. There's a resiliency, and let them know that, hey, you can pave the way for the next student. So maybe you're going through it now, but it's only going to make you stronger. You have resources, reach out to all of us. We're here to support you. At the same time, you can be a part of the change, but if you don't go there, you can't make the change. Like there's a light at the end of the tunnel type of conversation. So it's a lot of mentoring, counseling, building them up for the challenges that's ahead of them.
Franklin, you and I should talk about this more because I think we're doing similar things and I didn't realize we were doing it. So yeah, I love this question. I think it's really important. And I think it's something a lot of people struggle with, not just students, but people in the workplace and everywhere, like you said, anywhere, because it's everywhere. I think there's several things here. One is that I think it's important to understand that it is no one individual's job to change their institution. Like, don't set yourself up with that much pressure. Like for a lot of people, getting the job, staying in the job, moving up, that's it. That's the win, right? Like if you can do more, great, but don't put so much, I worry that people put a lot of pressure on themselves. I think there is this balance between, the best thing you don't want to burn out, and burnout is quite common, particularly if you have like a role that's explicitly to work on these issues. So finding this balance between being able to sustain it and then also feeling like you're making change is important. So I think there's several parts of this. One is creating community. If you try to just go this alone, you're going to burn out so fast and hard. So yeah, you need to be talking to, friends and family about it, but you also need to find other people doing similar kinds of things. It doesn't even have to be at your own institution or in your group. It can be somewhere else in your organization or a completely different organization. People who you can talk to quite openly about what you're doing and experiencing is really, really important. And then another thing that I've noticed is there's kind of time periods when I have like more energy to do this, and then periods where I'm feeling really like I'm just hitting the wall or I'm getting a lot of pushback or whatever is happening. And I'm like, or whatever it is, I'm like, so you don't have to be at like full throttle all the time. Like when you can, you do stuff. And when you're like, I am feeling really burnt out or whatever it is, like, it's okay to take a step back, talk to your people, regroup, get your energy back. You don't want to, it doesn't work to just like constantly be like pushing. Anyway, I think that's why there's a lot of burnout.
So I actually think that there is this weird phenomena of fear of failure and automatically assuming that someone else is better than you and can do the job better and just has more natural talent or whatever it is. And so I'm always thinking, yeah, that's really scary, but if I don't do it, I'm going to feel like I missed a chance. So why don't I just go for it and try it. And then if it doesn't work out, you know, there's always options maybe. And maybe this is naive for me to think this way, but there are always sort of options to pivot or to do something different, but not to be so worried of, and I don't know if this really answers the question, Tavina, so I apologize if it doesn't, but this idea of being fearless and giving it a go. And you know what, if you fail, that's fine. At least you tried, and you know, you'll just get back up and do it again. But the idea of trying to set yourself up as much as possible for success, which includes talking to others that are already in the field, so you know, get a good idea, and multiple different people, a good idea of what really are the challenges, what are they finding that's difficult. Although, you know, what I found is sometimes, a lot of times when I've talked to somebody, their experience ends up being way different from what my experience would be in that situation. So you kind of just have to take the thing, you know, take it for a grain of salt, I guess. But the other thing I think in terms of mental health is that when my body doesn't feel good, my mind doesn't feel good. And you don't really hear people talking about this so much, but finding something that you enjoy that keeps you active, whether it's a new sport or a walk or a hiking group or whatever, having a physical body that is healthy helps the mind. And this idea of exercise and being able to, you know, exercise does so much. And so if I'm feeling really stressed out, what I'll do is I'll go for a jog or do something active, and then immediately I feel better. Well, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Yeah, those were all really great things for us to consider. I love the not being afraid to fail, because this is a messy, I mean, life is messy, but especially as we address the inequities in STEM, it's messy. So we're not going to get it perfect, and just kind of going with being in it. So we have a couple of questions from our audience that I would like to jump into. The first one: what are some goals for allyship in the future of STEM? What are some goals for allyship in the future of STEM?
I can start with this one. For me, directing the Student Success Center is really understanding what companies mean when they say they're interested in EDI, because it's really not that clear. As far as, do you mean recruiting more students? Do you mean changing the culture at your institution? So really trying to figure out with the partner, like working in lockstep with them on what that means, and how can our university help with that? Like, how could we help you know, make your institution or your workplace a little bit more diverse? So I think that's something that's really like hone in on that is a good first step for us.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I mean, there's several parts to this. You know, it's quite clear that we need far greater diversity along many, many axes at all levels, especially, you know, we were talking about the leaky pipeline before, like particularly at the top. I think it also means shifting away from focusing just on diversity and talking about inclusion and people's lived experiences. I think it also means infusing EDI into everything that we do, and not thinking of it as this separate like outreach thing, but like, how is it in your classes? How is it in your research group? How is it in the way you speak to colleagues in meetings? How is it in, you know, conferences? It's, you know, how's it everywhere? And then for me, a big part of this is having more white people very clearly involved in this work, and more white men specifically. I'll just call it out. Like, we're not going to get the change that we need asking people in the minority to create it. We have to have more majority people doing this work as a central part of their job, very, very clearly.
I love that, interweaving it through everything versus making like EDI a separate thing. It really is involved in everything we do. So I love that point.
Which I think
So
Savina's great goes into that second one, which sort of tees up everything.
Yes. So let's see, the second question, how do you suggest we practice allyship within our own household and talking to those closest to us? Ooh, this is a good one.
You can answer this one too, Tavita, I think.
I think for me, the practicing vulnerability to me is really important here. And Dr. Brene Brown, if you all may have heard of her, she talks a lot about the power of vulnerability, right? And it takes courage to be honest in like sharing your experience. So I think just talking about it more with your family, friends, colleagues, even with students. Like when I do workshops with students, I encourage them to go into their advisor's office and just have a conversation about their experience, right? Being vulnerable, that's a really great start because to me it humanizes the experience, and that's really a good place for us to land when thinking about how we can practice allyship. So really just practicing vulnerability as often as possible, and it really does get easier.
Yeah, I think just talking about it regularly, having it be a very common thing that you discuss, like what are you experiencing, what are you seeing, what did you try, what did you see happen that drove you completely bonkers that you have to talk to somebody about it. Like that's why you live with people. Talk to them. For people who are in heteronormative relationships with kids, boy, does this come out. Like then all of a sudden you're like, wow, these gender norms are hardcore. So there's tons of opportunities then to notice who's doing what and have conversations around it. And that's a good solid 20 years worth of conversations right there. But yeah, I think support, like this is where, you have to have people you can talk to about what you're experiencing. So using the people in your household for support and asking for support if you need it.
I'll just second that, as a mother of 7-year-old twins and a 5-year-old, the ample opportunities for education, not just in support of them, but also trying to teach them how to recognize these issues and how to be a good human and make sure that, that they're doing what they can do if they see somebody being left out or they see inequities, so that they're addressing it and they're being, that developing a sense of responsibility within them that I don't think is done a lot in a lot of families, but, just trying to do what you can, I guess.
All right, let's move on to the next question from our audience. So as much as it is hugely valuable to have a close collaboration with faculty, how about with alumni in industry? Let me make sure I understand the question. So the experiences of alumni in industry is very important since this is where most graduates will pursue a career. So if I understand the correct question, it's how can we have close collaboration with alumni as well as we talk about allyship in STEM in addition to faculty?
So I can start here, and maybe even Kim might want to jump in on this one. But we have so we work with different companies, and sometimes we have people who have graduated from our from physical sciences who are alum who go into industry, and bringing them back, especially if they're not so far removed from the students, has been great. Students have connected really well with them. Honestly, some of the things that I may tell them, even Allison and other faculty members, like they listen to alumni even more closely because those are people who sat in their shoes. So I think just continuing to work with Kim Peters, she's our director of alumni, to identify alumni across the physical sciences and continue to have them work with us, come on campus, do presentations in classrooms. I really like when we do things about non-traditional careers in STEM, so that students can understand, hey, you have this degree, but there's a lot of different things you can do with it. I don't know if Kim, if you have anything to add to that, but that's my first thoughts.
No, I think everything you said is great. And I think kind of going back to something that was circulated really at the top of the conversation from you, Franklin, of just what does it really mean? You know, even talking about companies and working with our alums and companies of saying, hey, you know, we really want diverse candidates. Okay, well, what does that mean? What, you know, what are we trying to accomplish? And I think kind of Allison, you said it too, of just, or no, I think it was Sabrina, of just different experiences and asking the questions like for our alums and our students and really putting yourself forward, obviously utilizing alumni directors as students and as alumni themselves of, hey, if I want to talk to somebody at General Atomics, reach out to your alumni director and find maybe that person who you're like, hey, I'm going to be the only in the room. What does that mean? What does that look like? You said it. I think we've all experienced it. Of you say something in a room, and then the, you know, person in leadership or, you know, says exactly the same thing, and you're kind of going, huh, okay, didn't I just say that very same thing? So yeah, I think it's making sure that you reach out to your peers, asking those hard questions, and really putting the companies, I think, to task. So I know we have about like 4 more minutes left. So let's maybe take a look and see if there's one more that we can sort of sneak in there before we get booted out. I think this one, yeah. Can you share examples of what support and inclusion could look like to retain diverse individuals that are the only, especially when many don't see the problem? So kind of.
I can start with that. I mean, I think having ongoing conversations where you explicitly reach out to people from underrepresented groups to hear about their experience and just asking very clearly, how can we support you better? And then you have to actually listen and then do the things that they say. But you know, it can look different in different environments, in different places. But you know, it's quite common that people just aren't heard enough. And so making spaces that are specifically to hear from them. And then again, there's issues that are always very common around like salary equity, promotion equity, leadership equity. So there's things that you can be looking at in parallel, but we always want to be tying that to constantly hearing from people from underrepresented groups about what is your day-to-day like? What are you seeing? And then usually if you just ask like, what recommendations do you have for things that we could change? They got them. So you just have to be asking often, not like once, like regularly.
I think mentorship can be hugely successful and important. And so when you have new individuals come in, actively assign a mentor, actively find someone they can talk to that, you know, and mentorship is really hard because they have to be comfortable with it. But that ability to have a conversation and go one-on-one with someone who understands and is in that environment too, I just think can be so helpful.
And having a mentoring network. So it's not necessarily just one person. I think you got to have at least one, but as much as you can have more than one, and maybe different kinds of people that you ask different kinds of questions of is really, really good.
Yeah, I agree with both of those statements. The only thing I would add is that not to treat it like a monolith, like that person doesn't represent their entire race. Sometimes you see that happen. So I think understanding that component as well.
So I know we're wrapping up. Can I request if there's just like one last thing each panel member wants to share as we like leave this space, but we want to continue this conversation? What would be like your call to action or something for us to continue thinking about or doing?
I would say keep having these conversations and notice when you start to feel like, oh, I don't know if I want to say this or not. Maybe try just saying it anyway and see what happens. Find some safe spaces to start being very clear and explicit about what you want to see and practice it there so that then when you're in the room with other people, it's not a thing to talk about it.
Or say, be fearless. Don't be scared of failure.
I would say start with your comfort level, but make sure you're stepping outside of that. And then there's a spectrum that we talked about. Make sure you're going on the right way on the spectrum, pushing yourself a little bit further as time goes on.
Excellent. I would add trust yourself. If something doesn't feel right, just trust it. Don't try to rationalize it because maybe it's a cultural thing. Just trust yourself. Thank you all. Excellent call to actions for us to think about.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us. This was actually our 5th annual Triton Leaders Conference, and hopefully you enjoyed today's conversation. I know I certainly did. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference throughout the day. And thank you for spending your morning with us. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.